Hi, welcome to Courageous Journeys. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thank you for joining me for today's courageous question. Today's question is really kind of a combination of questions that I've received from about a handful of people, actually maybe even a little bit more, around sex, really. And I decided to bring these questions together and try to provide an answer this way instead of taking them individually, because this is kind of a really difficult question for me to give an answer to, because it's such an individualized experience for everybody, and without having more background information, it's hard for me to really specifically answer what their struggle is. So I thought I would kind of talk about it more generally, because no matter what the specific issue is that somebody might be struggling with around sex, I think there's some things that are pretty kind of generalized in terms of what might be helpful. So I'm going to be talking about the struggle that people have with sex when they've been abused or assaulted. And so this might be fairly triggering. I don't intend to get too graphic or anything, but it's a really difficult topic for most people. And in one way or the other, almost everybody that I've ever known who's been abused has struggled with sex in some way or another. Some people go on one end of the spectrum where they want nothing to do with sex. I actually believed before I started my healing that was how everybody reacted, which is part of the reason that I held on to so much shame, because that's not how I reacted. But people can go that direction, or what happens quite often is people will really go the other direction, where they engage in a lot of sex, a lot of different partners, potentially even risky or dangerous situations, maybe dangerous in terms of their physical well-being, maybe dangerous in terms of not using protection. So people can go one of two ways. It's fairly rare, or at least not very common, that I've seen people more right in the middle. So I think it's important to recognize that and understand, where do you fall on that spectrum? Have you wanted to completely avoid it? Does it make you feel kind of sick or disgusting in some way? Or have you gone the other direction and kind of become a sex addict almost, or what somebody might define as a sex addict? So recognizing where you are, and then recognizing also that either one of those or anywhere on that spectrum is common for people to experience when you've been sexually abused. So the reason that people struggle with sex in their lives, as a person who's just making your own choices about sex, I think is maybe somewhat obvious, but in some ways not so much. So when you're forced into experiences, and when I say forced, I don't mean physically forced necessarily, but when as a child, especially, either way, but when you haven't connected to your own sexuality yet, when you don't even understand what sex is, and somebody is using sexual acts as a way to abuse you, I think it's fairly obvious that it's going to seem confusing to a child. And it makes common sense, I think, that you might struggle with that a little bit as an adult. Even though we don't necessarily connect those dots ourselves as survivors, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So we struggle with sex for that reason that I just mentioned, and developmentally as a child, the way that you can process the things, the ability that your brain has to process and understand and put things in context and all of that is not fully developed. And so it naturally is going to create some issues. So as you come into your own sexuality, or maybe you were forced into engaging in sex acts with other people or something like that, but as you begin to engage in your own sexuality, you're going to be coming at it from a place that is really distorted, because you haven't learned about your own body, your own boundaries, your own desires in a natural way, a way that a child should be able to do that, a way that a young child even explores their own body. You didn't get an opportunity to do that at the different developmental stages that you were in on your own in a natural way. So it skews our sense of what is sex, what is intimacy, what is love, what is pleasure, what is trust, what is safe, and can pleasure and pain, emotional or physical, go together? Like, it really creates such confusion, even if it's not conscious. It creates such confusion in our minds and in our bodies. So when somebody goes the direction of not wanting anything to do with sex, they will often feel afraid and also feel ashamed because they're not interested, or they feel like they can't because they get scared, they have a flashback or whatever. Something keeps them from being able to engage in a way that they want to, so they feel shame about that. People on the other end of that spectrum tend to feel shame because they feel like there's something wrong with them that they engage in sex. They feel like that clearly they weren't bothered by what happened to them as a child. And so what does that say about them? So on either end, there can be a lot of shame that's associated with sex and sexuality and your body and pleasure, and even performing in a way, if that's the way that you might think about it. So first, that's the thing that I want you to keep in mind, that no matter where you fall in this spectrum, it's natural to struggle to some extent. I know for me, and I know that this is true for other people, I didn't connect the dots for quite some time. And even though I wasn't conscious of it from a very early age, I believed that I didn't have a right to say no. Now, I don't think that I ever consciously thought, oh, I don't have a right to say no, but I felt like there was something about me that was creating this, and even when it wasn't abuse. And so therefore, I didn't have a right to say no. I also felt way too self-conscious, I guess, that I would have been able to say no. So I found myself in a lot of situations that I didn't necessarily want to be in, but I didn't feel that I had a right to say no. And the reality is that while the attention that I personally got from abuse was not like loving attention or anything like that, which does happen for a lot of people, which makes it even more confusing. But I also felt that that was my value, especially because I had more than one abuser. And so I believed that for me to kind of further my value, that was the way to do it. So it was never a conscious thought, but I found myself in situations that I didn't necessarily want to be in because on a subconscious level, I didn't feel like I had a choice. I didn't feel like what I wanted mattered. And if I had thought that, I would have thought, well, this is how I feel that I matter in some way. So that was just my experience. Other people's experiences might be very different, but I do know that there are a lot of people who have kind of felt similarly to what I just described, I personally experienced. And I also felt a lot of shame, because I really believed, so this was way before I ever even knew that I was affected by abuse. I remember having thoughts that clearly what happened to me when I was younger couldn't have had an impact on me, or I wouldn't be doing what I was doing at that point. Because in my mind, if that happened to you and it was horrible, then absolutely you would not want to be around anybody, and there's no way that you'd ever want to have sex. So the fact that I was willing to have sex, in my mind, reinforced that there was something really, really wrong with me, because all that other stuff didn't bother me, didn't affect me. And did that mean that somehow either it wasn't that bad, I wanted it, or even caused it? So no matter, again, where you fall on this spectrum, shame typically plays a really, really important role in how we approach our own sex lives and even when I say sexuality, I don't mean like gay or straight. I'm talking about finding our own sense of sexuality and what that means for us, and our own sense of sensuality. And the shame keeps us from being able to do that. So when I look at all these questions that people have, what much of it really comes down to is healing the shame. That is such a big part of it. So you do that first by recognizing what shame are you holding on to around that. And then doing the work, the healing, therapeutic work of being able to heal that. And that is absolutely possible. The other thing is that you need to be able to feel safe to have sex. Now, for some people, and actually to orgasm, if that's a problem for you. So for some people, like I said, can have sex, doesn't seem to affect them at all, maybe seek out a lot of sex with a lot of different partners. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they feel safe. I wouldn't say that I ever felt safe in those early years. Never would I have described what I was experiencing or doing or feeling as safe. Because safety wasn't even something that I would have been on my radar. But in order to fully come into our own sexuality and enjoy sex from a really healthy, deep place, we have to feel safe. We have to feel safe within our own bodies, which is hard when you feel like that maybe your body has betrayed you, or if just you tend to be a really anxious person. So learning to feel safe in your body is also a really important experience to have. And one of the things that I will say about this is if you are engaging in sexual activity with another person, even if you've been married a long time or it's somebody you're just meeting, either way, when you are working on healing, it is important, I believe, to be able to really honor your own desires and to not engage in sexual activity if you're not feeling it. And I don't mean that you have to be really turned on. I mean that if you're not feeling that you want to have sex for whatever reason, I think it's important to not have sex. Because when you do have sex and you're not really feeling like you're into it, that you don't have the emotional desire or the physical desire, then you're reinforcing an abusive pattern. Even if your partner is not at all abusive, even if you feel pretty safe with that person, but if you're having sex and you don't really want to, then it reinforces that pattern that you've experienced before. You're telling yourself that you don't matter. And I hear this all the time from both women and men, that they will have sex with somebody because they feel like they can't say no. If they're in a partnership feeling like it's their responsibility, their duty, they're afraid their partner is going to leave if they don't. And like if you think about that, that's about somebody else's needs, right? The abuse was about somebody else. So you need to take the time and space to honor your own desires. Now, I'm not suggesting that, especially when you're in a partnership for a long time, that doesn't mean that you have to always be really, really into it in order to have sex. Because sometimes when you're in a long-term partnership, you may not really be feeling all that into it, but once you're in it, you're into it, right? So, but I would encourage you to wait on that until you've honored your own body and your own desires and your own need for safety. So that's an important piece. So feeling safe in your body and I forgot the other thing. Feeling safe in your body and recognizing when you want to and not having sex if you don't want to. If you hold on to shame around having any sort of pleasure as a piece of the abuse experience, so whether just feeling connected to the abuser, the attention that you were getting, or if your body reacted in the normal ways that bodies are supposed to react and you had an orgasm, or got an erection or something like that, working on releasing that shame is really important, because that we have to do the conscious work of separating what happened as an abuse experience and what you're able to experience as a choice in your adult life. And another thing that I've heard people say is if they can have sex and have an orgasm, then they're not affected. They were never affected by it or whatever. And that isn't necessarily true at all. It just means that your body works, and good for you. Because you can have orgasms or get an erection or whatever, feel aroused, and absolutely still have been affected by the abuse. So taking the time and space to release the shame and feel safe in your body. That's what the other thing was, shame. Releasing the shame and feeling safe in your body. If you feel like you cannot speak to your partner, if you cannot say to your partner no, I would encourage you to really reflect on the overall health of your relationship. And it doesn't have to mean that your relationship is bad. if that person treats you well and you know that that person isn't cruel to you in any way, that they respect you, that they honor your desires just naturally in your relationship, then that's something to work on in therapy. And just being able to speak openly to that person is something to work on in therapy. If maybe you've shared some things with your partner and they don't respond well, then really I would encourage you to evaluate your relationship, because it's important for our own healing overall, but especially sexual healing, to be engaged sexually with people who can hold the space for you to build that sense of safety, to explore your own body. And I don't necessarily mean masturbation, but although that could be a part of it as well, but to explore what feels good, what doesn't, to explore being able to say no, or please don't do that, and your partner not taking it personally and being able to move away and do something different, or be able to stop without like ridiculing you or making you feel guilty for some reason. So you might have a better understanding why trying to take specific questions and answer them might be a little challenging. The sexual healing aspect of trauma healing, sexual trauma healing, is something that can take quite a bit of time because of building that sense of safety. And like I said, there are times when you might go through a period when you do not engage in sexual activity, and that's okay. There's a book that's actually been around for a long time at this point that I think overall is a really good book to read. There's some pieces of it that I don't necessarily agree with, and it's been quite some time since I've read it. So I'm going to tell you what that is, and what I would encourage you to do if you take a look at it is read through it. The things that, if there's something that just doesn't sit well with you, your intuition is telling you, nah, I don't really know about that, then just skip over it. But she talks in there a lot about, and I think she has a term for it, and I don't remember now what that is, but she talks about some of the things that I've shared here today as well. She goes into it a little bit more, but it's specific for sexual trauma. And so the book is called, The Sexual Healing Journey. The Sexual Healing Journey by Wendy Maltz, Maltz. Like I said, it's an older book, but it is one of the better ones that I have come across for healing your own sexuality. That doesn't sound right, actually. For healing sexually when you have an abuse history. So, and I will share a link to Amazon for that. I'm not an affiliate at this point, so I'm not going to make anything or trying to sell it to you specifically for any reason, but I think that it has some value to it, and you might even be able to check it out at a library. So I would encourage you to consider that book. The other thing that I would say is I think that it's important to, especially if this is something that you're not comfortable with or you haven't taken the time to do, is as you're building a sense of safety within your own body around sex or sexuality, is to touch your body, to look at your body. We often, as survivors of abuse, tend to feel so much shame and disgust around our bodies. And very often we cover them up. because we don't want to be reminded. Or again, we could go the other direction. This may not be the case quite as much in the last 10 years or so, but some people can go the other direction and not want to be covered up. But exploring your own body, learning to recognize that it is safe to be nude, that it is safe to touch your body, that it's not shameful. I'm not even talking about masturbating necessarily, though that absolutely can be a part of it, and I think can play an important role, especially if you have difficulty with orgasm, or feel embarrassed or something like that. But just connecting to your body is really important, because if you don't feel safe with your own body, you're really not going to be able to feel safe with somebody else touching your body. So really understand that struggle with sex and sexuality as a survivor can look different ways. The most important things to think about are the shame that we carry around the abuse, and particularly around the things that we think about in regards to sex in general. And then learning to feel safe in your body. And meditating can really be helpful in learning to really connect with your body. Connecting with your breath is really helpful in terms of connecting with your body, and it can also help increase your level of safety in your body because it calms your central nervous system. So if you've got questions about anything that I shared here, please share them in the comments, and I will do my best to try to answer. This is kind of a difficult one, like I said, to be very specific about, because everybody's circumstance is different. But if you've got questions, please share them. And I will also share a link to another video that I did about our body's natural response to sexual stimulation, which might be a helpful video for you to watch as well. And if you are interested in the meditation aspect of connecting more to your body, the meditation album that I recently did has some meditations that can help build that sense of safety, so I will share that link as well. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to those of you who shared your questions around sex and sexuality. If you've got a question, please send it to q&a@courageousjourneys.com, and I will look forward to trying to answer those questions on this Q&A series. I will share that link in the description as well. So thank you everybody for joining me. I will look forward to seeing you next time. Have a beautiful rest of your day.